peeps? It's Great White making it happen again today with some more Portal Knights. Hope you guys are having a great day. I am having a wonderful day myself. Last night I was up rather late working on some logic block stuff on those two games that I'm in the middle of working on. We spent some time on the Portal Knight Line War game last night, and things are really coming along. And I've been meaning to do this. We started a tutorial series where there have been 2 episodes so far where we went through the tutorial worlds that Top Cat has made in the Steam Workshop. There are 2 videos and a playlist on my channel if you guys want to get started with those. Those go through the basics of how things work, but it's in an adventure mode style with text on a sign, which is useful. Don't get me wrong, I learned a lot by going through those, but I think it's nice to be able to see the creative side of things, to see how connections work, how we send signals, how signals are used in the game, and ways that you can use them in the game. So we're gonna do that today. It's gonna be some repeat from what we learned in Top Cat's world, but we're gonna look at it from the creative side. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna walk over here, and we have just a little area put together that I want to show you guys. So the step one of doing anything with logic block is you open up your menu and you have all these categories. The far right category is your logic items category. And we can see everything that involves logic is included in here. However, it's just a small spoiler alert. There are some things in here that are not included in this tab that are run by logic. For example, in the decorations tab, we have the drain and the water source. Those can also be controlled by logic blocks. I think there's one more, but I can't think of what it is at this time. But those I know for sure are controlled by logic. They are not in the logic tab though. But let's start with the basics. So we have all this stuff in here. Probably the most important thing to start with is how players are going to interact with logic when you make your game or you make your adventure world or whatever. How are players going to interact with that? Well, really, the most basic ones are going to be these 3 things right here. We have pressure plates. We have levers that you can toggle on and off, and then we have buttons which you can just press. I'm not going to press it right now because I want to show you guys how it works in just a moment. So that's the basics, but the most basic for you as the creator, what you need to have on your hotbar all the time is going to be the connection tool. And you can see I have that in spot number 1. It's important to have the connection tool available to use because that's how you're going to do all of your technical work in logic stuff. And you also want to have probably a torch, a placeable lit torch on your hotbar or any kind of light. I think the paper lanterns work just as well, but the torches are nice because they can be placed pretty much anywhere. Now, the reason for the torches is because they're really good for showing if a signal is being sent or not. So let's grab our connection tool and let's start with this pressure plate. So if we left click with the connection tool or whatever your action button is if you're on console, it brings up this screen. So this is the most basic logic screen. We just have this one object here and we can just get a connection from it. There's no inputs or anything like that. So the pressure plate's only going to send a signal. So we click get connection and we can see current connection lights up. This just lets us know that this is the current active connection in our connection tool. So we can close that menu, and now that we have this, we can see we got this fun little purple line following us around. Pretty neat. And you can see there's a pulse coming from it saying this connection is coming from that to our connection tool. And what we can do with that now is we can take any of these logic items, but let's start with the torch because I think that's the easiest and the most useful. We're going to left click on that, and the torch and any other lights for that matter are very simple because they come with one input. They only do one thing. They turn on and they turn off. And the only thing you're going to do is hit apply connection to apply that connection, and now we can see now that we've applied that connection, we have a signal coming from the pressure plate going both to the torch and to our connection tool. The purple one being showing that it's currently active on our connection tool, and the green one showing the connection coming from the pressure plate to the torch, both with a pulse. So you can see multiple connections can be made with a single input item. So we're going to call these input items, input blocks, whatever you want to call them, something like that. These are inputs. So now when the player steps on this plate, it activates that signal and it sends a signal. So that's another thing to notice, is that as soon as you connect something to the torch, like for this torch, nothing's connected to it. I can walk up to it, I can turn it off, I can turn it on. I can turn it off, I can turn it on. That doesn't do anything with logic. That has nothing to do with logic at all. That's just something you can do as a player. It doesn't change any signals or anything like that. But this torch, it becomes a logic item in that it will not be on unless the signal being sent to it is on. So right now, there's nobody standing on that pressure plate. That torch is not going to be on. It doesn't matter if I walk up to it and I try to turn it on. I cannot turn this on manually now like I can do with this one, because this one will only turn on with logic. So I have to step on this pressure plate to get that to turn on. So it's pretty straightforward. That's probably the most straightforward we're going to have of anything with logic blocks. That's at its most core. That's how it works. Now, if we move on to the toggle, to the lever, it looks pretty similar when we click on that with our connection tool. We just have the one option to get connection. Now we see down here, current connection, white pressure plate. So we can see this is not our current connection. But if I hit get connection, it gets this little tab, this little tick here on the corner, as saying that this is our current connection. And now our purple line is coming from the lever. And the lever works pretty similarly. Let's go and connect it to this torch now. Apply connection. And this is going to be a similar thing to the pressure plate, but this one, just when you turn the lever on, you can see it lights up around the lever, and that sends the connection. And this one is nice because we can turn it off. So you can turn it on, turn it off. There's no timer or anything. It can be on for as long as you want it to be on until you turn it off, and that's that. Pretty straightforward. And now if we come over to the button, let's click on that. Let's get connection. And we're going to notice something different about this input screen, is that, or this logic screen, is that there is an input. That's what this is over here on the left side. So everything looks pretty much the same over here. This is our usual get connection screen. But over here we have a number 1, and these are going to be inputs over here, and there are going to be a lot of different logic items that have inputs. Number 1, it means that's just the first input. Some objects have more than one input, and we're actually going to look at that in just a minute here, and I'll explain why a button has an input. Why would a button have an input? It doesn't make any sense. It does make sense. You'll see in just a moment. So if I go ahead and apply this connection from the button, I got the connection from here. I put it into this torch. Now we can see the torch is off, and if I press this button, the torch does turn on. So now this torch is receiving a signal. This button is sending a signal. We can tell it's on from the fact that it's pressed and it's lit up around the outside, just like the lever does. Now, the thing about the buttons, though, is that they're one-time use, or so we think. It's not actually one-time use, but just as it is, without anything going into it, you can't unpress that. It just stays pressed for for forever. Until the end of time, it stays pressed. That's it. There's nothing you can do about it. Just a single press button. But if we want to be able to use that multiple times, the input in here, just like the torch has an input, this has an input as well. So say we take something like this lever that we have turning on that torch. We can leave it in the torch. That's no problem. We don't need to remove this connection. We don't need to disconnect it. We can actually just take this and also put it in this button. And by doing that, it allows us to unpress that button. So buttons can only be pressed once unless you send a signal into them, and then you can just keep pressing them over and over again. That's kind of annoying to have to put another signal into it to be able to use a button again. I think that's a bit of a pain in the booty. So we have a solution using logic blocks where you can press a button over and over again without having to manually send a signal into it all the time. But we'll get into that a little bit later in the video. Now, so we know our three main inputs: buttons, levers, and pressure plates, pressure pads. What are they called? Pressure plates, right. So there are three main inputs. There is technically a fourth main input, and I would call that enemies. Enemies are kind of similar. They work kind of like the inputs do, where if you kill them, they'll send a signal. If we look at them, they're a little bit more complex. We'll get into those later, but I guess if we want to get technical, I would consider an enemy another type of input. But for the most part, for now, these are our main inputs. Now, let's just take a moment and look at some of the popular items you're going to be sending signals into. We can get very complex with these things, but just at their core, let me show you how these things work. So let's use the lever, actually. So we have the lever going into the button, we have it going into this torch. Let's take that lever, let's get connection, and let's send it into this. This is one of the new items. This is the confetti cannon. Now let's apply a connection right there. It only has one input, it only does the one thing. And if we send that connection in, it does this cool explosion confetti thing, right? Pretty cool. Now, one thing to notice about this, though, is that if you're going to send a connection into this, you want it to be for a certain amount of time. With the confetti cannon, it cuts off the audio if you end the signal too soon. So listen to that again. Yeah, so when you're sending a signal in there, you want to make sure it's long enough that it actually plays the whole animation, or you don't. Maybe you want it to be a shorter animation, or a shorter audio file, whatever you want. But that's just something I want you to be aware of with the confetti cannons. The other thing that I wanted to point out, yeah, and that might be an issue if you have like a pressure plate rigged up to it. I wonder if you run across the pressure plate too quickly, yeah, it's gonna cause problems. So you may want to find a different solution to setting off your confetti cannons. Let's disconnect that. Now let's grab our lever again, and let's put it in this note block. So note blocks just play a note when you send a signal into them. That's all. They just have the one input. They just do the one thing, and they're very similar to the confetti cannon in that if we hold it down, well, a little bit different. They keep playing the note over and over again. But if we, for example, cut it off again, that also cuts off that note like much quicker than it normally would. Which actually isn't necessarily a bad thing, because maybe you want to play a staccato note if you're making a musical composition in this game. It's very possible that's something you want to do. So it's kind of up to you how you want to use that. I just want you to be aware of it. Now, the next interesting thing that I want you guys to see, let's disconnect this note block. Let's grab this connection tool here, and let's look at the large doors. So large doors have two different inputs. They have input 1 and they have input 2. Functionally speaking, these inputs do the exact same thing. And as you can see from the little note in the middle here, we can apply one, but we cannot apply both. We can do the top one or the bottom one. You can't do both of them. Let's take a look if we input the top one. Again, functionally speaking, they're the exact same, but what you'll notice is if we do input 1, we get this red chain across the door. If we do input 2, we do not. Now, with no input at all, it's kind of like the torches were a moment ago. We can open the door, we can close the door, just like normal in the game. But as soon as we take a connection from something and we put it into the door, let's do input 1. I can't walk up and open this door now. It has to be opened with logic, which is going to be this lever now. Plus you get that chain breaking sound. So if you don't like that chain breaking sound, if you do input number 2, you don't get the chain breaking sound. And you don't get the chain animation thing. That's not on there. So doors, they all work the exact same. It's just that you have a couple different inputs. There are some doors that are an exception to that rule. For example, the I believe this door, the ghost barrier, this one doesn't have a second input. It just has one. It doesn't have the chains. And I believe the space door. Nope, that one does have the chains. Never mind. Excuse me. But you get the idea. One has chains, one doesn't. That's the only difference. And the chains, the color of the chains always match the color of the input. So if we put down this door, for example, and we use this green button on that door, input number 1, it has a green chain on it. So that way you can kind of give the player a hint as to what color of logic block they're looking for to open the door. But if we move on now to some other logic items, we have the turrets. I'm sure a lot of you, if you're going to be making games or adventures, are interested in using the turrets, and there is some stuff to know about these turrets. So if we grab, or cannons, I guess they are, blast traps, cannons, turrets, whatever you want to call them. So rotating ice blast trap, this actually has a little tooltip, which is nice. Input 1 starts firing repeatedly, input 2 starts rotating. So with these, if we go input number 2, and we can, I can show you this. Input 2, if we hold that down, that activates it, and now it just starts spinning. And you can see it pauses for just a very short second. It pauses at all the right angles. So it's not 100% constant spinning, but you get the idea. And if you stop it in the middle of a spin, it will complete the 90-degree rotation before it actually stops. Now, input number 2, you can actually use the same connection for both input 2 and input 1. And input 1, it's just going to start firing repeatedly. It's going to fire continuously and it won't stop. Now, that's actually unique of this turret. This turret will continue shooting up, like just constantly. But let's turn that off. And it will complete its turn, and it does take just a second for it to stop shooting, with this one at least. Let's remove those connections, and let's try the same thing over here on this poison trap. So if we hit the fire button on this one, it does fire repeatedly, but it's not constant like the ice one. The ice one is unique in the way that it fires. Most of the other traps fire like this, just like that fire one is firing right now. But we can turn that off. And the spin is the exact same as the others. Oh, one thing to note is that with these ones, if you have it spin and fire, it's going to spin every 90 degrees. So this one won't shoot at an angle. So if you want something that's going to shoot at an angle, this trap is really the only one that's going to do that. But we can turn that off. We can disconnect it. And now let's take a look at this trap. So this trap's a little bit unique too. The traps that look like this, the ones that go into the wall, we've got a few different ones. We've got the small ones and the large ones. There's ice, curse, light, and fire. And they all have a large or small variant. Now these, the way they work, you can either have the top one where it just starts firing repeatedly. Now when you place it down, I don't have anything in this right now, so it'll just start firing repeatedly anyway. But if you don't want it to be firing all the time, so we take our lever, put it into input number 1, it's actually going to stop firing. It's not going to fire at all, not until we send a signal into it. And as soon as that signal's on, it's just going to keep firing over and over and over again. But if you would prefer, you could also have it go into input number 2, or instead go into input number 2. And if it's input number 2, if we turn it on, it's going to fire once, and then that's it. It's not going to keep firing. It's only going to fire off one time, and that's all you're going to get out of it. So you're going to have to apply the connection again to get it to fire again. So something cool you could do is you could hook a button up to that and have the button be able to be pressed more than once. That's something we can do, but I find that buttons, when you have to press them over and over again really fast, sometimes they get stuck, and that can be a problem. So I have a solution for that, but that's another thing we're going to look at later in this video. Now, if we move our way down here, we're over to a little bit more advanced stuff, I would say. I'm going to call this a little bit more advanced. It's really not too complicated, but I'd say it's a little more advanced. So we have a few different logic blocks here. These are the actual logic blocks. This is like the meat of it, guys. This is like where we're really getting into doing crazy stuff. So when it comes to connections, there's conditions that you want to meet. So say I have 2 buttons in my dungeon, and I don't want a door to open until both buttons are pressed. There's a logic block for that. Say I have 2 buttons, but I want it to open when either of the buttons is pressed. It doesn't matter which one. Just as soon as they hit one of those buttons, I want the door to open. There is a logic block for that. There's a logic block to make pretty much anything possible. The sky's the limit in this game, really. So let's take a look. We have 2 different levers. One is white, one is blue, and they're not hooked up to anything yet. Let's take a look at this first one over here. This is called an OR gate. And an OR gate is exactly what it sounds like. As soon as we get a signal from input number 1 or from input number 2, this OR gate is going to send a signal. So let's grab input number 1. Let's put it into input number 1. Let's grab input number 2, which is going to be the white lever. Let's put it into input number 2. So blue is input 1, white is input 2. Let's grab a connection. So now we're going to get the connection from this OR gate, and let's put it into this torch. So now we can see the torch is not on, and we saw a lot of this in Top Cat's world, but now you guys get to see the logic behind it and how it works. So if we flip this on, it is going to turn on because either this or this is on. If we have both of them on, it does turn on. If they're both off, it does not. Just this one, it does. So as long as either of them is on, it's going to work. Now let's remove that connection. Let's remove these connections. Now say I only wanted to turn on if both of them are on. We're going to use the AND gate. So we're going to apply connection to input number 1, get connection from this, apply connection to input number 2. And now just one of them doesn't work. Just one of them does not work. If we do both of them, oh wait, my bad, I forgot to hook it up. So we need to get connection from this AND gate, put it into the torch. So let's do that again. Input 1, nothing. Input 2, nothing. Input 1 and 2 sure does turn on. Pretty cool. Then let's go ahead and look at this one. So this one's a little bit unique. This is called a NOT gate. Let's get these connections off here. This is a NOT gate. So a NOT gate is actually going to, it's very, very useful. It's going to invert the signal. So it's going to make the signal do what it's not doing right now, if that makes sense. Let me show you. So say we take just this one input, this white lever. Let's put it into the NOT gate, and let's get a connection from that and put it into the torch. So this lever is not on. We can see there's no light around it. It's not currently in an on position, and that torch is on. What happens if we turn it on? The torch turns off. So that's what I mean by it inverts the signal. It makes the signal do what it's not doing and sends a signal based on that. So when there's not a signal from the lever, the NOT gate is sending a signal. When there is a signal from the lever, it's not sending a signal. Yeah, pretty useful. There are a lot of uses for that, and we can get into those. I'll do a little bit more of an advanced tutorial after this one where we'll get into some of the cool things you can do with logic. But I just want to get you guys the basics here first. Now, we'll do these last. These are going to be, you're going to use these ones less frequently. We're not going to worry about those. These are like really your meat and potatoes of logic block building. You're going to use these a lot. These are the most important ones, I think, to really get a handle on and understand. These do have their uses. You absolutely can and probably will use these if you really get into building with logic blocks. But for the most part, this is what you're really going to want. And these are very useful too. Now, I did leave one out that I'm going to show you guys really quick. The clock. I'm going to put it right here. So let's look at this. These are time-based logic blocks. These are going to mess around with how timings work on your logic. So everything we've done so far has been pretty much immediate, right? As soon as I flip this lever, it's on. As soon as I turn it off, it's off. That's it. No ifs, ands, or buts. That's just the way it works, on and off. Now, these are going to actually add some delay to things, and they're going to do some other useful things for us as well. Now, let's just look at them first. This is a clock. We can read the timer here, and it says outputs on when the countdown expires. Input 1 starts the countdown with sound. Input 2 resets the countdown. Okay, well, let's look at this one. Inputs on when the countdown expires. Okay, well, that's the same as the clock. So the timer input number 1 starts countdown without sound. Input 2 resets the countdown. So functionally speaking, these are both the exact same. Well, with the exception of this has a weird ticky thing, and this one has a slider. I don't know why they did that. I have no idea. It's strange, but that's the way it is. So they're both the same. This one just makes a sound, and I can show you that really quick. If we send a connection into this for, let's not do 60 seconds. Let's just do like 5 seconds. You can see it makes that sound. I've never been a big fan of that sound. I don't care for it. I don't like to use those at all. I just think it's, I don't know. That's too cartoony for me. I just don't like it. Whatever. I mean, it's fine. If you guys want to use that, that's fine. I like to work with the timer. I mean, it's good if you want to know that it's like working, but I don't know. The timers are quiet, and I like that. So let's take a look at the timer. So input number 1 turns it on. Let's take this signal from this toggle, send it into the input timer. Let's go for 5 seconds. Get connection from the timer. Put it into that torch. So, oh wait, really? Is this on already? How's this on already? Oh, because the lever's on. Oops. So, okay. Well, let's fix this now. Let's grab a lever really quick. I didn't come prepared over here. Let's grab a red lever. So let's take that red lever and we're going to put it into input number 2. So, if we put input number 2, if we send a signal in, it turns off the timer. So, you can tell the timer is on because the torch will turn on, but it's only going to turn on after the countdown. So if I send a signal in here, this is input number 1. Let's send that signal. What's happening? Nothing's happening. Oh, there it goes. Okay, it's on. So 5-second countdown, and then it turns on. So there's not really a way to tell that the timer is counting down other than just knowing you sent a signal into it, which can get a little bit tricky. Let's turn this off again. So there's 2 inputs, right? Input 1 turns it on. Input 2 turns it off. The thing that you need to know about these is that input number 2, if we always have a signal going into that, it doesn't matter if you turn the signal on. We could wait here 20 minutes and that's never going to turn on. That countdown's not going to happen because input number 2 is currently active. Oh, shush, I know it's time to wake up. Input number 2 is currently active, so this timer isn't going to start even though I'm sending a signal, because this signal going into it is telling it over and over and over and over and over again to turn off, to reset, to reset, to reset, and it's never going to turn on because it keeps resetting no matter how many times it starts. But as soon as we turn this off, it's going to start the countdown as soon as this input number 2 is off, and it's going to turn that on. So that's something to be aware of. That used to just drive me crazy when I first started working with logic blocks, because I would have this signal turning it off and it wouldn't turn on, and I couldn't figure out why. Well, this is why. This is something that plagued me for so long, and I finally figured out. So you can turn it off. So if you had a signal going into it all the time, you could control it turning on and off just with the one input, but that seems like a silly way to handle things, I think. But yeah, pretty straightforward. Now, one thing, I'm going to say this, and it might be a little bit confusing at first, but timers have a use outside of just timing things. Timers are useful for more than just that. Timers are useful for saving an input. So, basically, if I want to send a signal from any of these inputs, so a pressure plate, a lever, a button, whatever it is, I can save an input. I can save the knowledge that a button has been pressed, that a pressure plate has been walked over, or that a lever has been turned on by using a timer. Like, for example, this lever, I can flip it on and flip it off. Now I know that that lever has been turned on. It's more useful if you flip it down to 1 second. I like to use the shortest inputs. Let's turn this off. So now, I flip this lever on, I flip it off. That timer is on now. This lever, I can turn it on or off as much as I want. But now I know that this lever has been turned on because this timer is on. So timers are useful for more than just timing things. Now, technically speaking, if those of you watching actually know things about combinational logic, there is something called an SR latch that you can use that is technically better for this. It's more immediate. There's not a 1 second countdown, and it saves inputs. It tells you that something has been pressed, something has been turned on. And that's fine. But timers are just one logic item. An SR latch is a whole thing we have to create. A timer is just one button, and it just makes it easier. So I oftentimes will just use a timer instead of an SR latch. So for those of you that are technical and watching this, I know, don't worry about it. I get it. But for people that are just learning, timers are very useful for this. So if you have like a room where you're summoning enemies or something like that, and you want to be able to see that all the enemies have died, well, that's something you can keep track of using timers. There are other ways to do that with enemies too. There's a lot that we can get into technically speaking, but that's something that you should just keep in the back of your mind. The timers are good for timing things, but they're also good for keeping track of if something has been done. They're good for keeping track, because then I can take this signal from this timer and I can tell something else to happen. I can send this signal somewhere else to do something else, and that's just a very useful tool. So just keep that in the back of your mind. I know that may sound a bit abstract and weird right now, but it's going to be very useful for you down the road. We'll get into some technical stuff in the future tutorials, but again, this is just basics. Now, delays. We actually talked about delays in Top Cat's World as well. All of these things we talked about in Top Cat's World, but just to show you guys a really useful useful use for delays. Let's get this all disconnected. Let's go ahead and place our torch down again. Let's just put it right here. What the heck did I just do? Get connection for that. Okay, so let's send the connection from our white lever into the delay. And then let's get a connection from the delay and put it into the torch. Now you guys know how this kind of works, I think. So basically what's happening is we can set the time of the delay, and it's literally what it sounds like. Transfers the incoming connection when the countdown expires. Input 1 starts delay, input 2 resets delay. Well, we only have one input, so that must just have been some kind of mistake. Nothing to worry about. I can explain exactly how this works. So when we push this button, when we turn on this lever rather, not push this button, this delay has a 1 second delay, and then it sends a signal to the torch. So we turn this on, 1 second later, torch turns on. Turn it off, 1 second later, the torch turns off. So the delay happens when you send the signal and when you stop the signal, both. That's important to know as well. But now we know when a signal goes into this and a moment later it sends it somewhere else. This is where we learn a pretty cool trick. This is your first cool trick you're going to learn with logic blocks. Remember this button we were using, and we press it once. It only does it once, right? And then I can use this lever to turn it off. Well, here's a cool trick with delays. Let's grab a delay over here. Let's place it down. Let's take the connection from this button, and you know what? Let's remove that red lever. So we're taking the connection from this button. We're going to send it into this delay. We're going to get the connection from the delay and send it back into the button. This is cool, guys. This is cool. So now what we can do is we can press that button. 1 second later, it unpresses itself. So now I can press this button multiple times. I can press this button as many times as I want, right? So that's pretty cool. But here's where we can talk about the timers now too. So I told you guys timers are good for saving inputs. So let's grab a timer. Let's place it down, and we're going to put a torch right on top of it. Right on top of the timer. And now, let's take a connection from this button and put it into input number 1 for the timers. So as soon as that button's pressed, that timer is going to turn on. This is where saving inputs is really useful. So say I have this in my dungeon, they come up and they press the button, the torch turns on. But then a second later, this timer turns on too, and now I can keep pressing this button. That torch is going to keep doing its thing, but now as soon as this timer is on, I know that button has been pressed at some point in time. So if I want some event to happen because that button has been pressed, I can use this timer to determine that while I still have this button taking care of whatever I needed to take care of, whether that's shooting a fireball or turning on a light or doing whatever it is. So yeah, we could take this connection, we could even have it go into input number 2 for this turret, for this cannon. And now, when I press the button, it's going to shoot a fireball. And I can keep shooting fireballs over and over again. And you can actually have a faster button press too, because this delay, right? So we remember the button goes into the delay goes back to the button. So this button's signal is turning itself off. So we can have a shorter button press. We can go 0.5 seconds. That's a fast button press. We could go 0.1 seconds. This is the fastest button press of your life. It's so fast. So you can really spam that fireball if you wanted to. But I wonder if I could show you guys. Sometimes these get stuck. Let me see if it'll do it for me. If we just spam the button a lot. Yeah, there it goes. So that's one thing to keep in mind with buttons, is that if you spam them a whole bunch, if you just keep pressing them over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, they will get stuck eventually. So if you want to do something like we're doing right now, hey, let's turn this off. So now can get annoying when you're building in Logic because now you have to get this unstuck somehow. The way to do that is that you disconnect this, you connect something else like this red lever, you unpress it, then you come back over, you get the connection from it, you send it back into the delay, get the connection from the delay, send it back to the button, and now it's fixed again. So you just have to reset everything. But you can see how useful these lines are, because look at this, for example. Now we have the connection going from the button to the delay back to the button. Look at the lines. So we have an orange line going to the delay, and then a green line coming back to the button. So you can see what things are connected just by hovering over them with the connection tool, which is really, really useful. And that's just the beginning, guys. That's just the beginning of Logic. So we're already doing cool things with cannons. We know about saving inputs with timers. We can also just use timers as regular timers. That's fine too, but you can see how crazy things can get. Again, we'll get into these later. There are some pretty cool things we can make with this, but that's just the absolute basics. Does that make sense to you guys? Did I explain it well? I hope I did. This combined with Topcast tutorials, again, watch those first if you haven't already. I hope that you're getting a good idea for how logic blocks work. The next step we're going to go into is we'll look at like enemies. We'll look at more advanced things with like combinations of items that you can use, of logic items you can use to make cool things. We're going to go further into this, but I hope this was useful. Make sure you do like this video if you guys did like it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and leave me a comment if you guys have any questions about any of this. I'll absolutely answer your questions. If you have suggestions for things you'd like to see me show in the tutorials, anything like that, or if you just want to talk about the update because it's a super fun one. But that's gonna be it for today, guys. Make sure you like it. And oh, I'm just doing the outro. I did the outro a second time. Oof. Someday I'll learn how to be a YouTuber. Well, you guys have been a pleasure as always. I appreciate you, and I hope you do have just the best kind of day. See you later, dudes.